Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. Today was the big day at the United Nations General Assembly's 74th session. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was speaking, followed, since it's done alphabetically, followed by the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. And there was a sense that this is going to be a big match. However, interestingly and somewhat ironically, Narendra Modi, in his speech, skipped any reference to Pakistan or to Indian-occupied Kashmir, which since August 5th has been illegally, unconstitutionally, and against the UN resolutions annexed by India. This is the first time that there was no mention of Pakistan or Kashmir. And I have this report in front of me from one of the Indian news media outlets, which says Pakistan figured 10 times in 2010, 5 times in 2013, 5 times in 2014, and 3, 6, 15, and 12 times over the next 4 years. Modi chose to speak about climate change, about a number of things, and also, yes, as expected, about his definition, quote unquote, of terrorism. And he said, and I quote, "We believe terrorism is one of the biggest challenges, not for any single country, but for the entire world and humanity." Well, of course, clearly that also includes state terrorism in occupied lands, state terrorism as in the spy that we captured in Balochistan, who was obviously, and who has confessed to it, was involved in terrorist and saboteur activities in Balochistan. Pakistan's Prime Minister also, as I said, addressed the UNGA. And he talked about, among other things, not just terrorism and various groups that in Pakistan that he said that the government has banned and proscribed, but also about the Indian-occupied Kashmir, where he said that there's been a communications blackout and a curfew, and India needs to lift that curfew. He also asked the international community, since he was at the World Forum, to do whatever it needs to do to give Kashmiris the right of self-determination. He talked about the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir, and he talked about the fact that there is a lot of tension in South Asia. Given that reference, he also talked about the Pulwama attack and how India reacted to that, and the military rounds that were played on Feb 26 and Feb 27 between India and Pakistan. And not least, he talked about the genesis of Mr. Modi's parent organization, the RSS, which is inspired by Adolf Hitler and Mussolini. And these are not, this is not rhetoric. These are facts. If you go back to the books of Golwalkar and Savarkar, the RSS ideologues, all of this is recorded in history. Anyway, we're going to talk about how this went and what this means, and we will start with Nick Harp, who is our correspondent in New York. Nick, thank you for being on the program. Since you have your nose to the ground, just give us a sense of how these speeches were received.
Well, it was interesting listening to the crowd reaction from the people who were listening inside the General Assembly Hall. There was clearly a division in terms of what they were hearing and their reaction. We were getting cheers, but also jeers, as we heard from Prime Minister Khan, as he was talking about the occupation of Kashmir, of those 55 days of curfew. There were certainly cheers, I imagine, from his delegation and friends of Pakistan, while there were jeers from the Indian delegation. So it was certainly a divided response. I guess it's interesting to note as well, while all of this was taking place just outside the United Nations, so just a couple of blocks from where I'm currently speaking to you, there was a very large protest taking place against India, against Prime Minister Modi. Several hundred people, perhaps up to about 1,000, all outside protesting against the Prime Minister of India and protesting against what he is currently doing in Kashmir.
Okay, Nick, this is very interesting, of course, and it's also expected. There's going to be cheers and there's going to be jeers. But before we get cheers, let's talk about the jeers. You said that the jeers were coming from the Indian delegation. Anyone other than the Indian delegation that was jeering?
Well, it's always difficult to tell because when you watch the feed of those speeches, the camera remains mostly on the speaker. It doesn't often cut away to show the crowd reaction. So it's difficult to tell exactly who would have been jeering within the crowd itself. But I guess there would have been some people within that room who felt that they were on India's side when it came to some of those comments, who felt that they needed to push back vocally to those comments, because that's not normally the type of thing that we would hear or see in the General Assembly Hall. It's normally a place of quiet, polite applause. It's not often a place that becomes particularly rowdy or raucous. We don't often see those loud cheers or jeers as we did during the speech today.
This is very interesting, but give me a sense of, as I said in my opening, this is the first time in many years that Pakistan or Kashmir did not figure in the Indian Prime Minister's speech. And I'm assuming that he deliberately avoided those two references. The fact is that, as the Genocide Watch has also said, they've issued an alert about Indian-occupied Kashmir. The Labour Party in the UK has actually passed a resolution calling for intervention and calling for giving Kashmiris a right to self-determination. Is your sense also that Modi thought that this is not really the time to even mention Kashmir and just skip the reference altogether?
Well, yes, it was very interesting that he made no mention to Kashmir, no mention to Pakistan, no mention to Prime Minister Khan. They weren't even obliquely referred to during the course of their speech, apart from, as you mentioned a moment ago, that loose reference to terrorist and terrorism, which does stand in contrast to Indian speeches of the past. But we did know going into today's speech that Prime Minister Modi was not going to touch on the subject of Kashmir. He said that that was not something that he wanted to speak about as part of his address to the General Assembly, but also his address to the world. And I guess his speech was looking much more on the successes of India, the type of things that he and his government, he feels, has been able to achieve for the Indian public, the things they've done in terms of poverty, in terms of sanitation, in terms of climate change.
Nick,
and he didn't want to touch on that,
except that there have been suicides, the unemployment rate is the highest in 45 years, the smart cities are nowhere in place, and the Ganges remains extremely unclean. But thank you so much, Nick Harper, our correspondent in New York, giving us a sense from the ground of how the speeches were received. We are also joined by Dr. Mohammad Faisal, who is the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Dr. Faisal, thank you for being on the program. Give us a sense of how these speeches were received, and also give us a sense of how, in several years, this is the first time that the Indian Prime Minister did not even have an oblique reference to Pakistan or to occupied Kashmir, which has been unconstitutionally, illegally annexed by India since August 5th.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ajas. The speech went very, very well. As a diplomat and for an ambassador from another country referred to me when I was walking out that this was history in making. And he was very lucky to have been present to listen to this. The 4 points that the Prime Minister made in this extempore speech were taken very, very well, because he was very, very clear on all 4 of them. First, of course, was climate change and what his government has already been doing with the billion tree tsunami and the 10 billion tree program now, and how the developed world has to pull its weight, because they are not. Pakistan is contributing minuscule to the emissions that are happening, but we are ready to contribute more and more to mitigating the environmental disaster that is happening. Secondly was the money laundering issue and how Pakistan is suffering because of it, and how we are trying to face it, and how the world should be together to
Just a quick
prevent it.
just a quick interjection, Dr. Faisal. On that, I think you also referred to the Indian agenda of getting Pakistan blacklisted in FATF.
He did, and that is something that we have witnessed firsthand, that the Indians are trying on the backside, even on the front, to have Pakistan placed on the blacklist, when we are not trying to do anything against the Indians. So it gives a very bad taste to bilateral relations if we are told by other friendly countries that the Indians are coming and they're telling us that we place Pakistan on the blacklist.
So is it correct? Is it correct to say that FATF, which is supposed to be a technical body, is actually being politicized by India and some other countries?
India has been unsuccessfully trying for it so far, and we have been able to resist the pressure because, as you very rightly said, it has to be on principles and laws and regulations, and Pakistan is ready to be evaluated on that. But if it is on political considerations, of course we would resist that. The third point that the Prime Minister made, and which had a lot of traction, was about the Holy Prophet. And he very rightly said that he always wanted to come to a forum where he would be able to tell the world, especially the Western world, that how revered the Prophet is for the Muslims, because the Western world does not understand our relationship with the Prophet. And he did mention that when he landed in England as a teenager, one of the initial programs that he saw was a comedy show on the Christ. This is how they perceive the Christ. And for us, even Hazrat Isa is way above and we very revered. And of course, the Prophet is another ballgame completely. So this had a lot of traction. As I can tell you that the entire almost Muslim diplomats who were sitting there were shaken by it. There were ladies who were really in tears, and I witnessed it firsthand because the Prime Minister spoke from his heart on it. And he said, I want you people to understand that why the Prophet is so important for us, and this is how we live, 1.3 billion Muslims. So a lot of traction. Finally, Kashmir. He was very frank that about the lockdown, about the pellet guns and everything, and of a possible face-off between India and Pakistan at the conventional level and at the nuclear level. And he made the point that he is not making a nuclear blackmail or a nuclear threat, but this is the situation that we are facing. And he ended it up by saying that if it happens, then it is La ilaha illallah. There's no God but Allah for us. So we are ready to fight if a fight is brought to our door. But first preference was dialogue. He mentioned, when he came to power, he said that let's talk about all the issues. He invited them, and the dialogue between the late Sushma Swaraj and Shah Mahmud Saab was to be held last September in New York, and they backed out of it. They agreed, you would remember, they agreed and then they backed out of it. And subsequently, all efforts for Pakistan for dialogue have been rejected by India. And finally, you had Pulwama. We were blamed for it. And then our territory was bombed for it. And then we had to bring down 2 of their aeroplanes to register the point that we exist and this is not a walkover. And I think
so you essentially saying that the speech was something that really sort of resounded with other diplomats there. I also heard from our correspondent that there were some people jeering. I'm assuming that would be the Indian delegation, but was there anyone else also jeering the speech?
I did not hear any jeering. There was a lot of applause, which was unprecedented, and it was very loud, and you could listen to it. The speech is available on the internet.
Yeah,
so
I heard
jeering.
that.
So there was a lot of applause, which is not a norm. The mood generally in UN is very somber and very bureaucratic. But the Prime Minister came across as somebody who spoke from his heart, spoke very frankly. I think the best point was that in the beginning, he highlighted that I have 4 points. And then he kept himself within those four points. And amongst them, the climate and all of the 4 points were very critical. Of course, Kashmir is for us the most important, but the mention of Prophet and the entire Ummah's sentiments that the Prime Minister reflected at this forum, it is very important because in my opinion, also in my time in Europe or elsewhere, people don't really understand what do we mean when we talk about our Prophet and where do we hold our Prophet in our thoughts.
Absolutely.
So this was very important for the Prime Minister to make them understand that this is how it is.
Absolutely. That was, thank you so much. That was Dr. Wasil, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson, speaking with us from New York. I am also joined by Mr. Khalid Faiq, a Kashmiri from Srinagar, and Ruwa Shah, who is also a Kashmiri from Srinagar and joins me from Istanbul. Let me kick off with Faiq Saab. Ms. Faiq, you heard the speeches, Modi's also and Khan's also. What are your first thoughts?
Look, I heard both the speeches and this is absolutely wonderful to be talking to you. First of all, I have been following you since many times. Look, one can't rebuke the fact that Pakistan is not only a party Kashmir issue, but it's also the party in Kashmir within. No accord or no resolution to this dispute can come to the table without their compromises or their concurrence. You have to take them on board. And what Prime Minister has said today, a Pakistani Prime Minister, we wholeheartedly agree with him. We should rise above the politics and rhetoric to which is another name for the votes. You have to rise above that and come to the table and solve the issues with the diplomatic negotiations. You can't really, denialism is no solution. What we have seen on the other part, what PM Modi has said, but denialism is no solution. You can't ignore the big elephant in the room by closing your eyes. By giving an account of how many toilets you have made, that doesn't absolve you from the responsibility of solving the issue that has been lingering around for 7 decades.
Absolutely.
This is absolutely funny.
Mr. Faiq, give me a sense of, since I know you were born very close to Jamia Masjid in Srinagar, which has been a symbol of sorts of Kashmiri resistance, and lots of people, even in India and Pakistan, let alone the rest of the world, they do not know this. The Kashmiri struggle did not begin in 1947. It goes back into the 19th century and even earlier than that. So when you heard Mr. Khan talk about this, and then before that you also heard Modi, who interestingly enough made absolutely no reference to Pakistan and to occupied Kashmir, that his government has illegally and unconstitutionally annexed on 5th August. What do you think in terms of how these two speeches impacted the diplomats in the United Nations General Assembly?
Absolutely, you can know. As I said, you cannot ignore an elephant sitting in your room by closing your eyes. It is a deliberate attempt to brandish your own politics or to take away the focus from the real issues to the non-existing issues. They are relying on non-issues. They're not facts. What PM Khan has addressed, he has been so eloquent and so to point that I have in my mind no doubt to accept that PM Khan has won this debate morally, or he has won the debate of the narrative, and people are looking forward to him. Ever since he came to power, he has been so vocal in Kashmir, and we want that. We want our voices to be heard, and we want a representative. And he has been a moral representative all over the world for us Kashmiris.
Okay. Mr. Faiq, stay with me. I'm also joined by Mr. Patrick Sullivan, who is Chief Executive Officer, Parliament Street, and also the political editor of The Commentator. Mr. Sullivan, thank you for being on the program. I'm assuming that you heard what the Indian Prime Minister had to say, followed by what the Pakistani Prime Minister said. What are your initial thoughts about the two speeches?
Sorry, I actually didn't quite catch your last speaker. But apart from hearing that about the voices of sort of Muslims in Kashmir being heard, and I mean, I'd like to say that Imran Khan has done a fantastic job this week of really raising awareness of the situation in Kashmir to the international community, because a number of sort of other issues domestically in both Britain and the United States have unfortunately caused the horrific situation in Kashmir to be overlooked, and I mean, as a result, today the U.S. State Department sort of has said that they hope to see rapid action in the lifting of the restrictions and the release of those who've been detained in Kashmir. And also say we look forward to the Indian government's resumption of political engagement with local leaders and the scheduling of promised elections at the earliest opportunity.
Mr. Sullivan, let me interject here and ask you something. I saw the State Department statement. I also, it's an occupational hazard, so we also have been following statement by other world leaders. And it seems to me that most of them are missing a central point in this situation. And the central point is that for many decades, the Kashmiris in occupied Kashmir, or what the world calls the Indian administered Kashmir, have been completely alienated with the Indian rule from Delhi or from Srinagar. They are constantly asking for a very simple right, which is an inalienable right, which is also a peremptory norm, i.e. that of the right to self-determination. Now, everyone seems to miss that central point and is asking India to restore normalcy in occupied Kashmir. That normalcy can never be restored unless and until the Kashmiris are given that basic right. Do you think that the world actually understands that central point about what the issue in Kashmir really is?
I don't. But I think that's one of the things that this week has been very good for, is there's a very big difference between the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who cuts a very sort of sober, sensible, measured appearance on the world stage, and actually is a great advocate for both Pakistan and the citizens of Kashmir. And I think he's done wonders. I was watching his performance on MSNBC, which is all the sort of cable news networks, and he really made the points that you're making very well. But the other thing is just the contrast as well with, I mean, if you go on YouTube or any such thing, that you see the propaganda that is being put out by sort of supporters of the Indian government. It is so jingoistic. It is so to use a popular phrase, it is so fake news just obviously that a number of sort of foreign policy sort of publications are actually saying that they're taking a look at what Modi's doing, and
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was Patrick Sullivan speaking with us. I'm also joined, as I said earlier, by Ruwa Shah, another Kashmiri based in Istanbul. Ruwa, thank you for being on the program. You heard the speeches. Let's start with Modi's speech. As I said earlier, interestingly and not somewhat ironically, he did not even have an oblique reference to Pakistan and to occupied Kashmir. Why do you think that was the case?
They have always chosen to, not to speak on Kashmir at any international platforms because of the rhetoric that they maintain that Kashmir is an integral issue of India, and it has to be, under the ambit of India, it has to be solved within. And I think to avoid any confrontation with the other world leaders, he did it, and it was very much expected. But this time there was also no reference to Pakistan. Oh, because he already must have expected, he must not have expected what happened after he spoke, but obviously he must have expected that Pakistan will have something to say today, and I think he wanted to avoid any sort of, a Pakistan blame game or whatever they keep doing at the United Nations usually, and which Ruwa, if I might interject, is very interesting. And once again, I mentioned this. This is a report from one of the Indian media outlets, and it says Pakistan figured 10 times in 2010, 5 times in 2013, 5 times in 2014, and 3, 6, 15, and 12 times over the next 4 years. But this time, no mention of Pakistan. Right. I mean, elections are over. He's back to power, probably not needing the, anti-Pakistan rhetoric and agenda. But his election was all about Pakistan. His election campaign was all about Pakistan. He won. He is sitting on that seat because of Pakistan. He said to his followers, it was in his manifesto that he will, anti-Pakistan agenda. Everything that he said before elections was Pakistan. That is what he said. It's very interesting. Ruwa, it's very interesting because on February 27th, when the Pakistan Air Force in broad daylight went in, targeted, and then also downed 2 of their aircraft, one Su-30 and one MiG-21, the Indian air defenses, in great panic, shot down one of their own helicopters. Now, the interesting thing is that one former Indian cavalry officer, Colonel Ajay Shukla, who writes, since he's left the army, writes for various publications, including Business Standard, and also has his own blog, wrote an article saying that the Indian Air Force had been asked by the Delhi government to not release the findings of the inquiry report because that could have impacted the election campaign and that could have presented the entire thing in a bad light. So, is this correct? And Prime Minister Khan has also been referring to this, that Modi and his RSS colleagues have been presenting Pakistan and the conflict with Pakistan as a vote-catching exercise. For this, you have to understand the masses in India, the people living in the mainland India. There is this hate in the air for the people of Pakistan, for the government of Pakistan, which has been encouraged repeatedly by the RSS-backed Modi government. And it was there earlier as well. We all know that. Let's agree on that India and Pakistan have been, people have been in this mood, or the sentiment is there for a very long time. But what Modi did is he encouraged those people, and he, the incidents that happened before the elections, whether it was Pulwama, whether it was the what called as the Balakot strike, or whatever happened, was only a machinery that was working for them to win the elections. And that is what happened. But what happened today is what I want to come at, Ejaz, is today will be marked as a very historic day. This is for the first time any person in the world has genuinely, truly and honestly represented the people of Kashmir at the United Nations.
You're referring to You're referring to Prime Minister Khan's speech.
Yes, I'm referring to Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech at the United Nations General Assembly today in New York. And the words were as clear as water, as sharp as sword, and he called a spade a spade. Never before has been any world leader has been able to say what he said.
Let me go back to Khalid Faiq here before I take a break. Mr. Faiq, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just want to add some words here. It has been in the past 30 years, no Pakistani leader has represented Kashmir, or for that matter, Islam at a world stage like this. I am truly impressed with the speech, and I condone to each and every word that he said.
Okay, so do you want to say some more about the speech's content in terms of Prime Minister Khan highlighting the situation in occupied Kashmir and how this could lead to further tensions in South Asia?
Look, today we should understand the fact that Kashmir is full of painful stories. In the traumatized valley that we are being forced to live in, people have been killed, arrested, harassed, subjected to humiliation, or physical harm. The unionist leaders even, who have advocated Indian democracy in the mainland in Kashmir for several decades, they are being detained, they are being barred to go out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Imran Khan today addressing Kashmir like this, and India completely forgetting whatever they used to do is one should know where people lie.
Okay, I get your point. Thank you so much. That was Khalid Faiq speaking with us. Let me quickly go back to Rua before I take a break. Rua, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I wanted to say something that, despite the communication blockade that there is right now in Kashmir, I'm reading those tweets, and I spoke to a friend just before this a few minutes ago, who was able to speak through a landline phone in downtown in Srinagar to some people. And there are already celebrations going on in Kashmir, and people are coming out on the streets. I mean, by celebration, I mean that you have to understand the emotional level that Kashmiris are at right now. And the people of Kashmir have started to come out on the streets. It means that there is an acknowledgement of the words that Mr. Khan said at the United Nations today. So India might want to say whatever they want to say, but it will not change the reality on the ground of Kashmir.
It will not change the reality on the ground in Kashmir, and the reality on the ground in Kashmir is what Mr. Khan actually placed before the world leaders at the UNGA. I'm going to take a short break and then return to discuss it further. Welcome back to India Special. We're discussing speeches by India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and also followed by what the Pakistani Prime Minister, Mr. Imran Khan, said at the United Nations General Assembly's 74th session. And so far, the finding is that Mr. Khan spoke from his heart. He was extempore, didn't read from a prepared text, but he made points very poignantly and very forcefully. And I'm now joined by Mr. Zafar Qureshi, who's chairman of Kashmir Campaign Global. hails from occupied Kashmir and now lives in exile, and also by Ambassador Asif Durrani, who joins me from Islamabad. Let me kick off with Mr. Qureshi. Mr. Qureshi, you heard the two speeches. Interestingly, as I said also in the previous segment, that the Indian Prime Minister chose not to even refer obliquely to Pakistan, and certainly not to Kashmir, which his government has occupied and annexed illegally since 5th August. And you know, that's not been the norm, because I've been quoting from this Indian news media report, which says the number of times that Pakistan has been mentioned in speeches by the Indian prime ministers or the Indian foreign ministers at the UNGA. So tell me, one, why do you think Pakistan was not mentioned? And two, what do you think of Prime Minister Khan's speech?
Jazakallah khan for this opportunity. It was indeed surprising for the first time an Indian Prime Minister didn't actually mention Pakistan. You know, for the last 50 odd years, we've always seen any Indian Prime Minister trying to raise this jingoism in the United Nations, blaming everything on Pakistan. I think one of the strategies that Modi is trying to play on the international level is that Kashmir is their internal issue, which the whole world now knows, alhamdulillah, thanks to the support of the peace-loving community around the globe, that it is not. So they were trying to sort of whitewash the Kashmir issue and trying not to internationalize it, you know, and I think that has miserably failed for this Modi government. No matter how much they try to maintain it as an internal issue, it's actually become more apparent that Kashmir is not just a bilateral issue, it is an international issue that demands, commands, and respects the involvement of international family to bring peace to the Kashmir unresolved issue over 70 years.
Absolutely. But at the same time, there was a large demonstration outside of the UN headquarters against Modi. And this wasn't just Kashmiris, this wasn't just Pakistanis, it included many people, including Americans and others.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think there were, thousands and thousands of people who came out today protesting against Modi, and that shows the genuinity and the support that the people of Kashmir have. And it also clearly unmasks this fascist government who claims to be, I mean, when you listen to the Modi speech, even having a little bit of understanding of Hindi, his statement started with that I am the Prime Minister who follows Mahatma Gandhi's vision of a democratic India. But apart from the Kashmiris who were outside the United Nations, as you mentioned, rightly said, there were people who were from different backgrounds, not just Muslims, not just Kashmiris, but from all walks of life, clearly sending a message out to the world that the current Indian government is not a democratic, it is neither secular, nor democratic, no people's elected.
There is deep irony, Mr. Qureshi, there's deep irony in those words, because Modi, a lifelong member of the RSS, is essentially the disciple of people like Golwalkar and Savarkar. And Savarkar was the mentor of Nathuram Godse, who actually killed Gandhi. So this entire thing is deeply ironic. But I think, and perhaps you'll agree with me, that Prime Minister Khan's reference to RSS and RSS genesis and RSS essential grounding in fascist Nazi ideologies was something that perhaps would be interesting for the world to understand.
I think the way, mashallah, Prime Minister Imran Khan today laid down the issue of Kashmir and represented it, not just giving the background on the atrocities that the Indian government is committing in Kashmir, but its background, the RSS background, the BJP's background, and most important, the Modi's background, was very eloquently, very well done. It really, I don't think there are enough words to say how well he represented it today. I think he made it clear to the world that we have been peacefully defending our right of self-determination.
Absolutely.
And we are trying to resolve this issue peacefully.
Absolutely, I think that was extremely important. That was really important that Pakistan does not want war or conflict unless war is thrust upon Pakistan. Thank you so much. That was Mr. Zafar Qureshi speaking with us. Let me quickly hop over to Ambassador Durrani here. Ambassador Durrani, you also heard the speeches. What are your first thoughts?
I think Prime Minister Imran Khan, actually, he very well articulated the feelings of the Kashmiri people. And I think now Kashmiris can say with satisfaction that here is a man who represents them, who represents their feeling, their aspirations, because the manner Prime Minister spoke about it, he spoke from his heart. It's just not that he did not apply his mind, he very well applied his mind. And he was quite convincing in that. If you look at the wording as well as the nuances which he actually he expressed, those were actually the articulation of the feelings of those people who have been under colonial rule. And if you look at the General Assembly Hall, out of 192 countries, more than 162 countries were colonies in one way or the other. And when you will translate this speech and its articulation to their aspirations, then ultimately it will trickle down that what he meant. And for the first time since it's Mr. Modi who took the action on 5th August against the Kashmiris, and today was the 53rd day of lockdown. So this also was quite, you can say for the Indians, quite embarrassing. It must have been quite embarrassing for Mr. Modi as well. Mr. Modi did not talk about Kashmir at all. He did not, but he did talk about peace and development. And he did not have the courage to talk about 53rd day of people's incarceration, they're being put in the concentration camps. So morally, Mr. Modi stood nowhere.
Morally stood nowhere, absolutely. That's the point that I'm back and discuss, Ambassador Durrani, but I'm also joined by Lieutenant General Ghulam Mustafa, a former Corps Commander of the Pakistan Army. General Mustafa, thank you so much for being on the program. You heard the speeches by Modi and also by Mr. Khan. Any first thoughts about, the fact that Modi, for once after decades, the speech had no mention about Pakistan, and Mr. Khan, who made a forceful case against India on what India has done in occupied Kashmir?
I think today the difference was very clear. You had a statesman and a leader. On the other hand, a normal politician who sees nothing beyond his own votes. And the fact that extremism is what Mr. Modi stands for. And I think not the fact that I'm a Pakistani, but anybody who would listen to Mr. Modi and compare him with Mr. Imran Khan as the Prime Minister of Pakistan, I think it's the first time you're standing in the heart of the world's financial capital. You're standing in the heart of the power center of the world, and you're tearing the world apart. I mean, how strong nerves the leader has to be. I mean, he's not scared. He's not afraid. He was fearless, and he really dug into the West for what is West doing to the world as a whole. Whether it was you talk of the climate change, you're talking of the money laundering, you're talking of Islamophobia. I think this was a wholesome speech and needed to be delivered to jolt world's conscience as to what they're doing to the world itself.
General Mustafa, quickly before I let you, Prime Minister Khan also talked about the fact, tensions in South Asia because of the Indian aggression in occupied Kashmir and also earlier against Pakistan. Do you think he managed to actually convey the message that we do not want war, but we will fight if war is thrust on us?
I think he was very clear on the subject. Anybody who understands this thing, and Ayaz, I'm sure you do more than the most here, that between the lines, what Prime Minister told them, that Kashmir is something that Pakistan will fight for, that Kashmir is something that Pakistan will die for. And the world must understand this. It's now the world's responsibility to force India out. Otherwise, the way the Kashmiris are being subjected to terrorism, the state terrorism that Prime Minister referred to, I think not directly but very clearly in that sense, unless the world does something about it, Pakistan has very little options. How can Pakistan let its own brothers and the Pakistanis who are in the Indian-held Kashmir just be massacred the way it is being planned and is being done already? So I think the message is very clear.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. That was Lieutenant Ghulam Musta speaking with us. I'm also joined by Lord Qurban Hussain, Baron Hussain, who's a politician and a life peer, was born in Kotli in Azad Kashmir. Thank you for being on the program. You heard the speeches by Prime Minister Modi and Mr. Khan. What are your initial thoughts about the two speeches?
It turned out to be a good statesman. His speech was very comprehensive. He covered many areas, including the challenges that Pakistan has on climate change and the Islamophobia, and also he mentioned his Pakistan's relations with its neighbors, and of course, particularly he gave a lot of time to Kashmir, which was very important because what is happening in Kashmir right now, Kashmiris don't have a representation at the United Nations. It is Pakistan who represents Kashmiris at this forum, and I think he has done his best to highlight the issue and the dangers and trying to wake up the international conscience that what is happening in Kashmir, it does need world attention, and it's about time that the world has actually woken up. And he has actually warned them that the way the Indian government is acting, they're going to increase more oppression in Kashmir, which could result in a war between the two countries, and the world is trying to avoid that war and give Kashmiris their rights. And I think he made a good case for that. And it's some time that we have not heard such a good speech from any Pakistani representative. I think it was a good speech overall.
It was a good speech overall. Thank you so much. That was Lord Qurban Hussain speaking with us. Back to Ambassador Durrani. Ambassador Durrani, how much traction do you think the speech got with the world leaders present at the UNGA? Because this is just the beginning of a long campaign. And I'm assuming I'll also ask you, where do we need to go from here?
I think it must gain traction with the passage of the time, because the issues Prime Minister had raised, just not Kashmir, but also global warming. And again, global warming, when we talk about our region, then it is linked with India, the glaciers we share. And then secondly, when he talked about money laundering, he in fact warned the Western countries that actually they are the parking places of the ill-gotten money in their countries. And those are those who in fact siphon off this money from the poor countries, they park their money in your countries. So again, he has warned the West that when they preach the poor countries to do this or that or accept their diktats. So I think it was quite a good message. Thirdly, on Islamophobia, to which India is also trying to malign Pakistan. So again, on Islamophobia, if you want to corner the Muslims, then it's not going to work.
Interestingly, on the Islamophobia thing, Turkey, Malaysia, and Pakistan also on the sidelines had a seminar on this, and apparently, according to Prime Minister Imran Khan's tweet, Turkey, Malaysia, and Pakistan also want to have a joint television channel informing the world what the facts are and to sort of educate the rest of the world. Thank you so much. That was Ambassador Asif speaking with us. This is all the time we have for today's Indus Special. We shall now see you next week. Until then, it's goodbye.